Good morning, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to all of you today morning. Thank you so much for joining us in spite of the rains outside. We are very happy to welcome you today, which is for our convening on unlocking investor action for a just transition in India's fashion sector, which is a part of a project that we are proud to be doing with Impact Investing Institute, London. And we are also delighted that we have Ashling, who's flown in all the way from London to join us today. We are much honored, sir. Thank you so much for joining in today. Our event today, as you can see on the screen, has two panel discussions. There is also a presentation of findings on the project that we are doing with Impact Investing Institute. There is also a case study presentation by Upaya Social Ventures. And Shruti, thank you so much for having flown in all the way from Bangalore for joining us today. After lunch, we will also have a closed-door roundtable to deliberate on the proceedings that have happened before lunch. Our effort today, through these panel discussions, case studies, and roundtable, is to assess where we are today and where we stand today, and to arrive at forward-looking recommendations to mobilize more capital towards the just transition in finance. Some of you are new here and new to IIC, and you may not be knowing the work that IIC does. So this is just 3-4 slides to take you through our work. IIC is an industry body about a decade old. Today we enjoy the patronage and support of close to 70 impact investors and ecosystem players. IIC works in the areas of what we call as 4 Ps, which is policy, partnerships, programs, and publications. This is a glimpse of our member partners, not all of them, but many of them. IIC has 70 plus members. We have hosted 11 India Rooms till now. India Rooms is a flagship program of IIC, which is a platform for meetings of LPs and GPs. We have come out with 25 publications, hosted 5 Prabhavs. Prabhav, again, is a flagship event of IIC hosted in New Delhi once every 2 years, and we have made 20 plus representations to the Government of India. Under programs, we have hosted 2 mega programs, which is, the first is India Blended Finance Collaboration in collaboration with USAID, and the second one was on climate financing campaign in collaboration with NEEF funds. We are doing 2 more programs this year. The first one is Impact in collaboration with KPMG, and the second is the one that we are attending today, which is Unlocking Investor Action for a just transition in India's fashion sector. Under the partnerships vertical and in India Room, we have hosted 11 India Room events till now. A few of them have been in Indonesia, Netherlands, Singapore, Denmark. This year we are having 3 events, 2 of which have already happened, one in Tokyo, one in London. We will be having one India Room event in Berlin on the 9th of October. Under publications, we have launched multiple reports, and we have a monthly newsletter called Market Pulse, which tracks the investments that are made in the impact sector every month. Under policy work, this does not get advertised, so many of you may not know about it, but we have closed-door consultative sessions with our ecosystem, which is the Ministry of Finance, Reserve Bank of India, SEBI, IFSCA, and Niti Aayog. I would now like to invite Ashling and Varun to take us through their case study. Thank you.
Super. So lovely to be here today, guys. As Girish mentioned, I've travelled over from London to support the launch today, so really happy to be here. Not my first time in India, but it's been a while, so great to be back. Just thought I'd give you a little bit of context to the Impact Investing Institute and who we are. So we were founded in 2019, and we came off the back of recommendations from a government task force that was looking at impact investing. And really, we have a vision of reshaping capital markets to be greener, fairer, and more resilient for everyone. And I guess at our core, we're really a systems change organisation, and our mission is really to accelerate the growth of impact investing market as a way to challenge the kind of wider financial system. So really, we believe that if we can scale a financial market that delivers risk, return, and positive impact across the asset classes, we can really demonstrate what's possible to mainstream capital markets. And in this way, impact investing becomes a tool, not just a niche activity, but a vehicle to really embed social and environmental outcomes into investment decisions at scale. So our strategic priorities, as you can see here, we advance innovative practical solutions to help capital markets address societal challenges and grow the field of impact investing, deepening in practice and influencing the broader market. We do this by building innovative solutions and also expertise across the market. And then a little bit on our structure and capability. So our approach falls into two areas. So we have our challenge lab, and this is where we take environmental and social issues where capital isn't currently flowing, areas where impact investing could make a difference, but isn't quite there yet. So we look at designing practical programs to help unlock capital, one of which is we're talking about today, and includes research, convening investors, and developing practical tools and solutions. And then on the field building side, we look at supporting asset owners, so foundations, family offices, pension funds, and institutional investors to adopt impact investing approaches. So we also work, as Grace touched on as well, we also work to shape policy environment, and given our kind of connection into UK government as well, we work quite closely with government departments to look at how government and impact economy can work in partnership together to deliver on the missions. So I guess ultimately our role is to act as a connector, bringing together financial services, policymakers and civil society to demonstrate how capital can be deployed to address today's most pressing challenges. And some of our achievements to date, I won't go through them, all of them, but these are some of the key highlights since we've been in place since 2019. As I mentioned, working with UK government, we worked with them on delivering sovereign bonds. The Just Transition criteria, which I will talk about in a second, is a tool that we initiated, and we worked with a number of investors on putting that together. And a number of other pieces around supporting local government pension schemes and policy frameworks, and working with a range of players across the capital spectrum to invest in impact. So why are we here today? And maybe just to kind of touch on that briefly, what do we mean by just transition? So to kick us off, that's the definition that we have from ILO that some of you will be familiar with. So greening the economy in a way that is fair and inclusive as possible to everyone concerned, creating decent work opportunities and leaving no one behind. So no, that's a definition that's quite widely used. We're going to build on that a little bit today in the context of just transition finance. So based on our work with the G7 task force, so this is back in 2021, the Impact Investing Institute, we led an impact task force as part of the G7, and part of that work was to look at how do we take this a step forward in terms of unlocking private investment to facilitate a just transition. So you can see there was a number of parties involved in this that came together, over 170 people. And essentially, the task force identified 3 elements linked to just transition that when we put them together, we can consider when looking at how to invest in a fair and inclusive transition to net zero. So people always laugh when I describe this because I draw the stool, and thankfully the stool is on the screen, so you know what I'm talking about. But effectively, the 3 elements that we look at are advancing climate and environmental action, obviously that's a key part of the net zero transition, improving socioeconomic distribution and equity, but also increasing community voice. So they're the 3 core elements that we look at when we talk at just transition and also investing in this space. And I guess that impact task force back in 2021 put a call to action on investors to kind of launch and invest vehicles that align with these 3 elements. And just, I guess, the why should we focus on just transition finance? I think most of you will be aware in this room, but we obviously, when we're looking at net zero, it needs to deliver not only for climate, but also for people and their communities who are at the core of a lot of this work. Financing on a large scale is needed to support just transition. I think estimates are at 4 trillion, maybe even slightly more now, a year. So that means that we need players from all parts of the capital spectrum, including private investors. And I guess where we're at the moment is more and more investors are aware of their role in financing a just transition, but still need, I guess, support in understanding what role they can play and how they can kind of action their capital. So just very briefly, what we do at the Institute around just transition. So we look at raising investor awareness and commitment. So we have a community of practice at the moment. We have about 27 investors that represent just under 6 trillion assets under management engaged in that community. We do convenings, we come together. One of the key pieces that came out of that was the just transition criteria, which I'll talk to in a second. And we also look at bridging knowledge gap and developing tools to enable more action in this space. Why we do it, as I touched on, we need many institutional investors need support to understand, I guess, how they can integrate these social co-benefits into their investment process. And where we sit as an institute, we provide independent expertise and we can facilitate that knowledge exchange to inspire that investor action. So then just briefly on the just transition criteria, because I think it's relevant in this space. So we created this, as I mentioned, with a group of asset owners who manage over 4 trillion, as well as input from a range of NGOs and social investors. It's basically a first of its kind practical tool to allow investors to look at those 3 elements of just transition and how can they incorporate those into their investment decisions and product design. And as I've outlined here, we calculate that over 3.6 billion has been allocated using the criteria, and it's also been used across a number of other use cases broader than just the investment use case, so across geographies and asset classes. Great, and then I guess what brings us to today, and just as I lead into Varun, so as I mentioned and outlined, what we do at the Institute is looking to, bridge those knowledge gaps and ultimately mobilize capital. And this project, we're delighted to be involved in this project with IAC. I guess some of the rationale behind why we should be looking at fashion sector and India, and we know that employs more than 45 million people, and it's the second largest driver of employment in the country. The fashion sector globally is responsible for around 10% of emissions, which means that we need to be looking at it in the context of transition. And we know there's a number of social issues that sit around this space given the interaction with workers and communities. So it's really important that we look at this sector, and we're really happy to be doing this piece of work, kind of deep diving in to how do we mobilize global investors and asset owners to really focus on this sector to drive social and environmental impact. So I'm really delighted to hand over to Varun, who's going to bring us through the project in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Ashlyn, for the very comprehensive overview of Just Transition. It does help set the context. So, hi everyone, I'm Varun Reddy, Manager of Programs at Impact Investors Council, and I'll be taking you all through some of the findings that we have been doing till date on the research. Disclaimer, we are still underway with our research as well, so we'll be refining them further as we go. These are just the initial set. So while Ashlyn helped us understand what just transition is, we all could agree to one point that it is not very new. The term might be new to us, but we have been doing work in impact investing, climate investing, where marginalized communities and transition towards green has always been the core. So we all would agree that the work has already been done. So just transition just puts words to that effort so that we have the community taken care of as well. So now let me introduce you to the program and the way we looked at it. We are all very excited when we got this project. We all had great ideas thinking about this project, saying that, hey, let's look at different kinds of materials. Let's look at what is happening across different parts of India because there's so much of happening as well. But then we narrowed down to thinking, how does material move across the value chain? Where does it start? Where does it end? What does it entail? So we started looking at it from a value chain perspective, understanding what happens across the value chain. I'll be showing the value chain slightly later in the study as well. And what we did after that is we described some of these segments, and we wanted to do an investor mapping exercise to understand where does the investor interest lie as well. So we reached out to a couple of investors after a couple of round of follow-ups as well, of course. I'll be showing some of these findings later on the investor part of it. You can see some of the logos already on the right side of the screen. So that part is on the first bit on the investor mapping exercise. Second part is on the just transition bit, because we are speaking about just transition. We need to understand what does the community need? How do we measure some of these metrics? How does the investor align to it? So that is the second part of the study that we are doing, to understand what are the community needs and how do we finance it. So as I said, we started looking at it from a value chain perspective of how does the material travel, starting from the production side of it that you can see, sustainable cotton cultivation. We have multiple initiatives that are being run under organic cotton or regenerative cotton or better cotton initiative as well. How do we scale that up across different geographies, because it is happening in pilots. And the second part of it, we understand that MMCs, which are man-made cellulosic fibers, while they are growing as part of the industry as well, we need to find sustainable sources for feedstock. So that's where alternative materials for fashion comes up, where we try and understand how do we leverage some of the agri residue or other high cellulosic materials that can form as a replacement or complement that as well. So that is the production part of it. If we go into manufacturing, we all totally agree that there are MSMEs and there are some conglomerates who are in the manufacturing side of it. We need to understand how do we enable them to be a part of the transition as well, and what are some of the innovations that can help us decarbonize it. So on the manufacturing side, of course, the energy becomes a very important part, and the second part is wet processing, because we all understand that dyeing and printing process is very intensive on chemicals, and it also impacts the community. So what are the innovations that are existing in this space? We started out thinking about the innovations. There's only one innovation, which is KB Goals, which is doing the microbial dye space. So that's on manufacturing. Let me come to the last part of the value chain that we all might be aware, which is textile waste management and recycling. Again, a quick disclaimer that I want to give. All these value chains have a sub-value chain as well, so which we'll be deep diving further. On the textile waste management space, we understand collection and sorting, and then there is the recycling technologies as well. Mechanical recycling happens to be one of the highest that is done in India, but it has its own limitations in terms of tensile strength when it is recycled, when it is usually downcycled, and it is not ready to be used in other textiles as well. So chemical recycling happens to be one other alternative for it. Again, we are still in a very early stage, but there is investor interest across all of these segments. So, and the last bit is consumption, which is sustainable consumerism in fashion. We tried and understood what are the B2C or the D2C brands that are existing, leveraging any of these innovations or all of these innovations, and leveraging the artisanal community that is already existing as well. So that is what forms under the sustainable consumerism and fashion part. So what we did was we shared this entire value chain with people across all the investors. So we reached out to around 169 investors. How did we narrow it down? We thought about impact investors, people who are already making investments into impact sector, people who are making into investments into climate sector as well. So it included VCs, PEs, some of the DFIs, foundations as well. And we got confirmations, people responded. So 61 people responded, so that's the good part of it. And while 42 have been mapped across the value chain, you can see the logos on the side. There are about 42 logos as well. So that's on the investor mapping bit. What stood out for us was a larger chunk of investors were interested towards alternative materials for fashion, which again, as I described, it is finding alternatives or replacements or complementing the MMCFs or any other conventional materials as well. Some of the close results would be cellulosic chemical recycling, because investors are interested towards that as well, and wet processing and technological innovation, sorting facilities. So now this is the main part. So the people factor, right? We spoke about investors. We tried and understood what are the investor needs. But then we went back and said, how do we integrate the people? How do we understand who is part of the value chain? And how do the investments impact some of them as well? So the next slide is on that. We tried and understood who are the people who are the part of the value chain that are usually impacted, and how do we ensure that whatever change happens, it is tracked. So what we started doing is we tried and understood what are the business models that are already existing and who are the investors who are tracking some of these metrics. And then also we use secondary data to understand and leverage how does the sector change when investments happen. So while we have summarized some of these metrics in the next few slides, we'll have comprehensive metrics covered in our report as well. So you can see from the different parts of the value chain, starting with sustainable cotton cultivation, farmers, of course, will be impacted in a positive fashion when we make the transition towards just transition, which is either through Better Cotton Initiative or organic cotton or regenerative cotton. There'll be improved incomes that can be measured. It could be their livelihood improvement and also on their lifestyle as well. On the sustainable manufacturing and processing side, we could look at the fewer pollution grievances that are happening across the communities there, because once we make that transition, the health outcomes, what we understood also from investors was, in the case of Pawan is here from Chirate Ventures, so what we understood was the wet processing side of it has so much of effects on the community as well. So when we transition towards a better or safer alternative, it impacts the community and a health outcome as well. So I'll just summarize some of these slides. And textile waste collection and sorting, of course, we have the informal workforce that is existing in this value chain. Once they are formalized, how does their income improve? Do they have access to some of the social security schemes that are existing? So these could be some of the investor metrics that could be measured. And let me just go back. So there's one quick survey that I would just want to do by raise of hands. Before I go into the business model execution or the investor insights part of it, how many of you in the room here are already or look out for any sustainable fashion when you go shopping or when you go out and look out for clothes which are made by paying fair wages? Any raise of hands? Wow, that's a good group. Perfect. So when we went ahead and showed some of these metrics to the investors as well, what we realized was everybody said, Varun, these metrics are amazing. But how do we prove the business model? If there is no business model, it'll be an NGO. That's what we got to know as well. So this is what stands out for us as well. We at present, where do we stand? The innovations are slightly in the early stage across some of these sub-segments as well. Costs are relatively high because some of these value chains are not established. Infrastructure is missing as well. So usually the target segment, we follow a reverse hockey approach where we try and prove our solutions in smaller pilots among the consumers who are ready to pay the premium, and then we scale some of these technologies as well. In future, I would say it will be decided by all of us in the room on how we will progress, how we will take action as an industry on building some of the infrastructure that is already not existing currently, on improving the awareness as well. So this is what stood out for us from the investor side of it. They want a strong business model with also the metrics that they want to track. So there are some missing links currently in the value chain, while some of the business models do exist. So I'll pick up on alternative materials for fashion because this is one segment which received one of the highest interest as well. What we understood is you can see a sub-value chain, how the material travels from feedstock to garment manufacturing. What stands out is while these innovations are happening, they're still very early. They don't have adequate infrastructure to pilot some of these solutions as well because the infrastructure is expensive. We all understand that textile manufacturing is very capital intensive. So what stands out is limited infrastructure for them to pilot some of these solutions as well. What could be some of the solutions? There is something happening already. Some of these conglomerates are setting up sandboxes that can be replicated at scale. There can be shared facilities that can be used to test some of these materials as well. And an example that was given was machine manufacturers might have some of these machines lying around. Why don't we leverage that? So those were some of the findings. And the next part that I want to touch upon is from a sectoral challenges perspective on waste management and textile recycling and collection. So you see the entire value chain again, starting from waste generation to end processing. While business models exist across the value chain, there were some entrepreneurs confirmed as well, but I don't see them in the room. But yeah, there are business models existing across the value chain. The point that I'm trying to make here is, as the sector, it has its own challenges. Because one is recycling. If the waste is being collected, recycling of textiles is happening in clusters, largely concentrated in Panipat. So what happens to these innovations or entrepreneurs that are trying to build the waste collection and segregation value chain is they don't have the access to reach Panipat because the cost logistics happens to be very high. So that was one of the challenges that they highlighted, high logistic costs leading to thin margins in the waste collection and sorting space as well. And of course, blended feedstock happens to be a very big issue because all that we are wearing at times is not completely 100% one material. It might be different kinds of viscose, lycose, cotton mix, and all of that. So blended feedstock, we don't have innovations for that to have a textile to textile recycling as well. So I just wanted to highlight some of these challenges from a sectoral point of view. So this is where we come in with this program. So what we are trying to do as well is try and understand some of the sector needs. what does the sector need from each perspective, from the entrepreneur perspective and also understanding the investor perspective. We'll be deep diving it into further actionable points for us as well. And you can see an illustration that I have done. I know this is very easy for me to put it up on the screen, but it is very difficult to do it on the ground. I completely agree with you. But what we'll try and do as part of this program also is try and map different capital providers that I told you before. Where does grant capital come in? Where does patient equity capital come in? Where do we see debt capital? So this is how we have mapped currently. And how do we leverage some of these innovative financing mechanisms as well to make this happen? We'll be seeing a case study by Upaya Social Ventures. They have leveraged some of these innovative financing mechanisms that will help us build more context as well. So this is where I'll stop. I hope I'm not bored you with some of these insights. I hope you found it insightful. Now I'll hand it over to Girish as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Varun, first of all, for the hard work that has gone behind this and for the width and depth. Thank you also for the brilliant structuring and articulation. And also thank you, Ranjana, for being the brains behind it. One can figure it out. I would now, it gives me great pleasure to now welcome Shri Rohit Kansal, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Textiles. I would request you to deliver your keynote address, sir, and thank you so much once again for being here today morning.
Thank you, Girishji, and thank you, IIC, for having invited me here today. As I sat through the first two presentations, one on the kind of work that IIC is doing, and the second on a detailed exposition and the work that has been done on the textile sector, well, it could have been me delivering his keynote address. And I'm amazed at the granularity and the depth with which Varun has presented his findings. And these are many of the issues that we discuss with and grapple with. And the two things that particularly struck me are business models, but looked at from not just the sustainability lens, but also the community lens. So in that sense, it ticks off most of the objectives that we in government want to achieve. I'm delighted to join all of you here for this important launch of Unlocking Investor Action for a Just Transition in India's Fashion Sector. And as I said, this answers most of the questions that we in the ministry have been looking at: investor action, impact investing, just transition, and the textile sector. Therefore, this gathering marks a critical moment for the Indian textile and apparel industry that is not just a driver of economic growth and employment, but also a key stakeholder in India's climate and sustainability goals. And why should that be so? The Indian textile sector today accounts for $176 billion of output, $40 billion of which are export. It is the second largest employer after agriculture, accounts for 30% of all manufacturing jobs, 10% of India's merchandise exports, but also for 8% of India's waste. So whether you look at it from an economic lens, whether you look at it from a community lens, or whether you look at it from a sustainability lens, this sector is important. But today, India's fashion and textile sector is entering a decisive chapter where economic growth, climate ambition, and social justice must necessarily come together in a strategic alignment. We are aware of the urgency of an environmental transition, decarbonizing supply chains, phasing out hazardous chemicals, promoting circularity, scaling clean energy are not just to-dos. Today they have become strategic imperatives. But what is most important, that along with the sustainability, circularity, and the decarbonization agenda that we must strategically pursue, we also have to ensure that our transition remains just, inclusive, equitable for the millions, especially the women and informal workers who constitute the backbone of this economy. And I wrote this before I have had an opportunity to look at the kind of work that you are doing, and which is why it resonates so strongly with us. 70% of the workers in India's apparel sector are women. 80% of production in the fabric sector comes from MSMEs, many of whom have turnovers less than 10 crores per annum. And at the Ministry of Textiles, we are leading this transition. We started off with a small ESG group 2 years ago. Today it has grown into a full-fledged division in the ministry itself. We have launched projects on circular procurement, waste recycling, capacity building. Through stakeholder consultations, we are building a stronger and robust foundation for economic, strategic, and circular change. And what are some of the things that we are doing? Our activities are through multiple partnerships. And these partnerships are diverse, they are across the spectrum. They are with impact people like you, they are with business, they are with multilateral organizations. For instance, with UNIDO, we are looking at eliminating hazardous chemicals from the apparel supply chains, targeting systematic change through incentives, regulatory changes, policies, and multi-stakeholder collaboration. With UNEP, we are doing an Intex project to promote circular business model, address overconsumption, promote sustainable consumption, reduce toxicity in textiles. With the European Union, through the EU RECII project, we are mainstreaming resource efficiency and circularity, modernizing sustainability, strengthening global value chain, and looking at textile recovery facilities and recycling. And I mentioned to you a short while ago about our ESG initiative in the ministry through a task force which is co-creating this shared pathway with all other stakeholders. And we are already seeing how 1 million mutinies are happening at the ground level, and how change is driven from the very bottom. And how is that change being driven? It is driven through the hundreds and thousands of MSMEs in the clusters that make up our textile ecosystem. Tirupur cluster-wide initiatives, reuse investments are enhancing environmental stewardship and worker well-being. Panipat remains the recycling capital of India, where informal recyclers remain central to India's thriving post-consumer textile recycling ecosystem. TRF hubs in Bengaluru are formalizing an once informal economy, enhancing safety and improving value capture in the circular economy. But we speak about this all the while, and while we speak, I think it is the community lens which today's gathering and today's event brings is what is most important. Because we will transit. Transit is no longer a transition, is no longer a choice. And if we do not transit, transition will be forced on us by the demands of legislation that is happening outside our shores, by the demands of brands who constitute most of our buyers, by the demands of people who buy from the global south. But the question to ask is whether this transition is going to be just, whether this transition is going to be equitable, and how is this transition going to impact the thousands of MSMEs and the millions of workers, women, underprivileged who constitute this textile ecosystem. And it is therefore that transition should be just, and this just transition is not just a strategic necessity, it is a moral imperative. As we scale sustainability, we must unlock investment that is not just climate smart, but is also socially responsible. While the green transition promises a net positive job growth, especially for women, it poses challenges in the shape of automation and digitization, which need to be looked at and balanced through social security nets, through reskilling, through training of informal workers, and investments have to necessarily prioritize livelihood, security, not just emissions reduction. We looked at a 2023 survey of over 300 global banking executives, which found out that 9/10 of them acknowledged the impact of green finance decisions, but only 31%, one-third of them, actually reported incorporating these social considerations into investment decisions. This must change. And I think the heavy rain has not deterred any one of us in this room from coming together and starting this event on time. But the outcome of this event has to be that the one-third number must be changed to the 9/10 number, and that is the needle we are seeking to move here today. To enable this just transition, we must evolve from viewing social benefits as externalities to treating them as investable, measurable outcomes. I have said elsewhere, and I was at a UN-led function where we got together all the multilaterals on one platform, under one roof, where I said that climate change must be looked at as a public good. And only when we start looking at it as a public good will we start factoring in the community lens in all the investment decisions that we make. Financing instruments must necessarily account for social KPIs such as gender equity, reskilling, and community engagements. Blended finance models that de-risk investment must prioritize equity-linked, scalable projects. And we must look at outcome-based financing where social and environmental goals jointly trigger disbursement. Programs like the Global Environment Facility have shown how concessional finance can embed social targets directly into financing structures. And this can readily be embedded in the Indian context. The government is working together with stakeholders to co-create a sustainable Bharat mission. And in this sustainable Bharat mission, we shall look at global pathways at sustainability. But we will not just look at global pathways at sustainability from a strategic perspective, from a buying perspective, or from a brand perspective. We will also look at it from a community and a social perspective. And interventions by the government need not necessarily always mean fiscal or monetary incentives. We will also look at policy nudges. We will look at filling in regulatory gaps. We will look at facilitative platforms to co-create this pathway with the private sector, with private capital, including impact capital. We will lead the way forward in building a nurturing environment that will enable entrepreneurial, impact-led businesses to scale with clear taxonomies, harmonized disclosures, and collaborative financing to enable trust and community participation. India is uniquely placed in the textile sector. It is probably the only country which is the leader in raw materials, which has strengths across the value chain, from agriculture to manufacturing to fashion to apparel. It is the only country where the domestic sector is probably 3 to 4 times as large as the export sector. And therefore, unlike many other economies, we are not just dependent on exports. It is the only country which has a 3 millennia year old history of textiles. It is the only country which has lent words like muslin to the English dictionary. But it is also the only country where the 9 R's of sustainability were practiced, not just spoken of, practiced before the world started speaking of sustainability. Mahatma Gandhi once said, the world had enough for everybody's need, but not enough for everybody's greed. And when he said this, he was only echoing what the Brundtland Commission said to define sustainability many decades later. But what Mahatma Gandhi said was only an echo of what the ancient Indian scriptures in the shape of the Vedas and the Upanishads were speaking of when they spoke about reverence for Mother Earth. And you will be surprised to know that each of the 9 R's of circularity finds an echo in some ancient Indian practice or the other. Reuse, for example, is defined by Rafu and Kamta. Repair is defined by some of the practices of not throwing away our clothes, but making them reusable in different other forms. And many of us in Indian families are aware of what the world today calls pre-loved clothes. In so many Indian households, we have seen clothes being reused, recycled, repaired, handed down till they became absolutely unfit for any kind of consumption. So when the world speaks of sustainability and circularity today, we in India must remind ourselves that we have been practicing sustainability and circularity for at least 2 millennia, if not more. Therefore, this is India's moment to define a globally admired, locally rooted, just fashion economy. And this transition is not just about net zero in business. It is about net positive. It is about people positive for the planet, for our clusters, and most importantly, for our people. I thank all of you for inviting me, for having brought together such a set of impact investors, for having presented in such granular detail what we need to do about our textile value chain. I only want to say that the Government of India and the Ministry of Textiles is committed to leading this, to forging a pathway for an impactful, just, meaningful transition. We want to co-create with all other stakeholders an Indian fashion sector that is not just globally competitive, but also socially just and ecologically resilient. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Dear sir, thank you so much for coming here today. And on behalf of Impact Investors Council and Impact Investing Institute, we'd like to extend our sincere and heartfelt thanks for your presence and your thoughtful insights on the entire value chain and the sector. Thanks for all the appreciation and encouragement for our work, sir. We really appreciate that. Your remarks brought, much needed focus on the policy landscape as well as the importance of, public-private partnerships in this critical sector. And, for bringing about the systemic change, we need all the help and support of policy, of investors, and of ecosystem coming together. Your leadership and vision added, immense value to the dialogue and has actually helped us set the tone for today's discussion. So thank you very much on that note. We look forward to continued engagement with the ministry, sir, going forward as well, as we work collectively towards driving investor action in this very important and critical sector. So thank you very much for being here today. With this, I want to move on to the very first panel discussion for today, where, we have an incredibly diverse set of investors with us today, each bringing their own unique lens to their investing. I'd like to, invite Akash Shah from Peak Sustainability Ventures. Peak Ventures, an early-stage investor backing purpose-driven businesses, are tackling challenges in key areas of energy, food systems, water, and climate. Next, I would like to invite Hardik Bhanushali from Spectrum Impact. Spectrum Impact, as we know, represent the family office of Aarti Industries, bringing flexible catalytic capital with an eye on climate and sustainability. I would also like to invite Raj from Yunus Social Business. Yunus Social Business is a pioneering impact investor funding grassroots and enterprise-led just transition initiatives. Satish Sagu from Tamil Nadu Green Climate Fund. Tamil Nadu Green Climate Fund is a government-backed initiative working at the heart of one of India's largest textile hubs. Moderating this wonderful panel, we have Janvi Papriwal, Circulate Capital. Circulate Capital, true to its name, is known for their investments in the plastic waste solutions and are now open to exploring into sustainable textile investments. So join me in welcoming the panel, everyone. And over to you, Janvi.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first panel of the day. So thanks, Ranjana, and thanks, Mr. Kansal, for setting the stage and the wonderful presentation from Varun. I think it's been very enlightening so far. And as we move to the next chapter of talking further about the value chains, the challenges, possibilities, and the opportunities, let's start quickly with a brief introduction from all of our panelists. Maybe I can start first, since I already have the mic with me. So Janvi Papriwal here, I represent Circulate Capital. We are an impact fund investing in the recycling value chains. We are global in nature. We have $250 million of AUM, investing in the emerging markets of Latin America, South Asia, Southeast Asia, in growth equity stage companies. That is, we do $10 to $20 million of check sizes per company. And we also invest globally in innovative companies who are solving for material-related challenges in the plastics recycling value chain. So that's briefly about us and myself. And I would request each of our panelists to quickly introduce themselves, starting with...
Thanks, Janvi. Akash from Peak Sustainability Ventures. I'm a partner at the firm. We invest across sustainability, new energy, food systems, water, and a broader climate bucket, including alt materials, plastics, circularity, and have been investing in this space since 2008 and very excited about textiles in particular.
Hi, this is Hardik Bhanushali from Spectrum Impact. We are a climate-first, deep tech, impact-based fund. We are investing in early-stage companies across debt, equity, and grant. The check sizes go from 50 to 250, and we have done follow-on investments as well. The lens, I would again make sure is impact first, with a heavy potential to get climate change and decarbonization. So.
Raj.
Hi everyone. My name is Raj. I am from Yunus Social Business Fund. We are a patient debt capital provider to early stage SMEs working in water, sanitation, waste management, agriculture, and our investment is also supplemented by technical assistance and handholding we provide to these early stage companies. Yeah. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Satish. I manage the Green Climate Fund at TNFMC. It's an impact fund promoted by Government of Tamil Nadu and a few banks and insurance companies. We manage 3 thematic funds. One is the Tamil Nadu Shelter Fund, which is into affordable housing projects. The second fund is the Emerging Sector Seed Fund, which does early stage deals in VC space. And third is Green Climate Fund, which I manage. On the Green Climate Fund, one of the core area of investment is circularity, in which a textile perfectly fits in. So that's the focus area which is relevant for us in the textile space. Thank you.
Thank you, Satish. So starting with our discussions, and I'll turn to you, Akash, first. And we had a pre-panel discussion, by the way, a few days back, and we had a lot of interesting topics that we covered. And picking from there, Akash, you had mentioned that Peak is focusing on sustainable cotton cultivation. You've set up a joint venture in this space, and you've also funded a startup leveraging hemp as an alternative material. So given that cotton is actually a major input in the textile industry and also one of the most resource intensive and environmentally challenging crops, can you share a little more about the project that you have undertaken? And also walk us through the joint venture, the hemp-related investment, and other areas that you're exploring in this space.
Yeah, thanks, John. We're happy to. And I think, like I said, there's multiple opportunities, as the minister mentioned, as well as challenges in India itself. And these stem from a combination of recycling to water usage, which is something that's perhaps a little less focused on in terms of water quality, and also behavioral change, which is honestly, in our mind, one of the key components to this, where now we live in a world where fast fashion is significantly on the rise, and consumers largely dictate where demand comes from. And so when you think about which stakeholders need to be involved, it's not just producers, but also consumers. In addition, we think there's multiple pools of capital that need to be allocated in this space. It's not just early stage innovation, which can address many of these problems, but also in some cases JVs, in some cases sort of blended finance and other types of structured financing. So in that light, as Janvi mentioned, we've led a deal in a hemp company, and this is to replace cotton using sort of hemp, which is an alternative material to cotton. And I think the perspective is a couple of things here. Firstly, cotton is a highly unsustainable material. For every 1 kg of cotton, it requires about 7,000 to 10,000 liters of water. Now, India itself is in a water crisis. We have 4% of groundwater resources, but 18% of the world's population. 21 cities in India will run out of water by 2030. And so water is an area that separately we are very passionate about, but not being focused on at the moment by a significant part of the investment community. In addition, what we like about hemp in particular is that it grows naturally in India with no necessity for pesticides or fertilizers. The company that we're working with has already established sort of offtake agreements with large textile manufacturers to de-risk sort of commercial viability. And I think what's interesting about hemp in particular, natural fibers, is that you don't need to necessarily replace cotton 100%, but you have to think about blends and starting to kind of change demand on a gradual basis, which then reduces the sort of demand for cotton itself. In addition, they're working with smallholder farmers, many of whom are women, and improving farmer livelihoods. And so there's a co-benefits aspect. And you can use every single part of the hemp plant, everything from hemp hurd for biochar, as well as certain other parts for different applications. And so hemp in particular is something we're super excited about. We've just led this deal and would love to work with people regarding it. In terms of kind of other pools of capital, like Janvi mentioned, we've announced a joint venture with a textile manufacturer, and this is to decarbonize their emissions. And so this kind of addresses scope 3 emissions from large global brands that buy a lot of their materials because they can report higher traceability and lower scope 3 emissions. And this is by replacing coal in their boilers using agri-waste. And so this is actually a joint venture Peak has done with this company. And this is more in what you would call like a large-scale project. And then lastly, we've joined the board of a company called Global Development Incubator based out of Washington, D.C., which is focused much more on developing a vehicle to bring financing down to the very bottom of the pyramid in textiles by combining sort of financing with sort of structured financing and grant capital. And this is a vehicle supported by IKEA Foundation and Lourdes Foundation, and we are helping scale it up, specifically in waste and specifically in textiles as well. And so I think the point is that a combination of early stage capital, joint ventures, and these public-private partnerships are necessary to address multiple issues in this space.
Thanks, Akash. This was really very helpful. And moving from upstream solutions, I'll now jump to midstream and recycling, as you touched upon, and moving to Hardik. Hardik, you've also come from a textile academic background, right? And during our discussion, you touched upon certain points related to textile and sustainable options to recycling, considering just transition. Now, as we deep dive into textile recycling, and we all, pretty much understand the challenges with regards to mechanical recycling, right? The collection ecosystem is underdeveloped. There are challenges related to color, material type, fabric blends, and so on and so forth. Given this context, at least we at Circulate Capital see chemical recycling as a promising alternative to mechanical recycling. And we know that there are a lot of startups working on this area, but would like to understand more the nuances of chemical versus mechanical. And just to give a little more context, Circulate Capital has invested in a company in the US called CIRC, which has developed a technology to separate the multiple types of blends in a fabric so as to ensure that these blends, these separated materials can then go into their respective value chains so that they can be recycled. And again, that brings back to the challenges of mechanical recycling, and that it's been pretty hard in post-consumer in India. So coming back to you, right, given that you wear both your academic as well as investor hats, how do you think this opportunity can be actioned upon? And where do you currently stand in terms of textile recycling? And more specifically, what is needed from all the stakeholders in the ecosystem to move this needle towards chemical recycling in India?
Thank you, Janvi. So, the challenges that we have with mechanical recycling, right, the early part of it, which is sorting, right, they all stem from a main reason that a lot of textiles that are used right now are all blended. We find very less 100% either cotton or polyester or others, right? Even if we have those, there are a lot of post processes which basically go on to it to make it water repellent or make it crease repellent, or so there are a lot of chemical processing which are going on top of it. What eventually ends up happening, so when we mechanically recycle it, of course the issues are there where the strength is not managed. But when we try to chemically recycle this, the problems would be that different chemicals and different fibers would react in a very so the whole process, rather, right, if you have elastane, right, which is used quite a bit, you have polyester, you have cotton, you have three different fiber sources which are majorly used rather in one textile. Now, if you want to recycle this, you need three different chemical recycling processes. Every single recycling process that is needed to at least separate each of these individual blends would come with its own inefficiencies, would come with very high alkaline or acidic conditions, would come with its own problems of sequestering. And once it is also sequestered, then the effluent treatment, that has to be made sure that it is also treated in the right way. While all of this is being done, the question becomes, we are putting in so many chemicals, we are putting in so much energy, everything is happening at 100 degrees, 150 degrees Celsius. So there is a lot of energy that goes into it, a lot of chemicals that go into it. So this process of chemical recycling by itself is not very green, it's not very sustainable. So even though we are trying to enable something which is sustainable, we are using the means which might not be as good. So that's where a lot of work has to still be done, right, where green chemicals are eventually used. But then the question is, how efficient would those methods be? So in my sense, chemical recycling is still a bit, in a place where more and more innovations will be coming. The shape of how the chemical recycling happens today would definitely focus more, on polyester, on polycottons. And as you mentioned CIRC, right, I mean, to take CIRC's example, French government is helping CIRC in a very big way, right? I mean, almost a $500 million investment is being done for a state-of-art recycling. Now think about the problem that we talked about, mechanical sorting, right, of what we're thinking. Now, if you have a $500 million machinery which is, hungry for input, think about how much important it becomes to organize the previous parts. Because if you don't solve for the sorting, if you don't solve for the right input into it, then you have this big machinery which is either sitting idle, which is not efficient, which is not recycling at the right scale. But when you are recycling at that big of a scale, think of the stakeholders that also are, coming in. If the governments are coming in, the equity funds are coming in. CERC as a US-based company itself took a while to get to a part where even the academically, when this whole technology came up. So for us to get all of that here, we would need such kind of investments. Like I definitely echo what Akash said, like, there are different pools of capital. We definitely need, grants and supports early on. We need some cluster-based support where machinery is available for trials. We need consortiums where, new startups get a sandbox to play, where industry is coming and helping in. And while they are doing this over a period of time, when this whole technology is coming up and developing, that's when the bigger capitals could come in, where equity could be handled, and then at governmental level, right, huge capacities are basically being put through. But while all this happens, one of the things that I would still like to highlight is that we should always look at this from an end-to-end sustainable way, where we are looking at a life cycle analysis of what is happening. Sometimes what is happening is recycled textile at this point, or in this day and age, sometimes it's becoming either more expensive than what the virgin material of it would be. So that being said, we are not saying that let's not recycle. You should, because then you are, trying to safeguard your future, because at some point the virgin, oils would run out. But while you are looking at it, we need to make sure how to make that LCA much better, how to make sure that the cost overall comes down, that we are not really working on a green premium, but we are actually working on a green discount.
Thanks, this is very helpful. So, and it calls for looking at the entire ecosystem in a holistic way, right? Looking at all the legs of the entire ecosystem. And that brings me to communities. And Raj, given that you've been an impact investor, and you've been early backers of models centered around underserved communities, right? Be it farmers, waste workers, artisans, etc. So from your perspective, what stands out when you're evaluating business models in textiles and for just transition in this space? Be it farmers working in the cotton fields or workers engaged in the waste management ecosystem, where do you see the readiness and the impact potential in this segment? And given that you've also built a technical assistance facility for textiles at Unis Social Business, what do you think are the key gaps in the ecosystem today?
Sure. Thank you, Janvi. So we as an investor focus more on the just piece than the transition piece, because we feel that we need to integrate, whether it is the farmer who is working on a cotton and where we are financing these FPOs, or whether it is the waste workers who are working with these organizations like Saha, Sasrudala and others, the companies which we have funded. When we evaluate these models, we see that how these workers are integrated into the formalization instead of being displaced, and this is what we look for when we are funding any of these models, and how these communities, how basically all these business models are more inclusive, and the other part is obviously them being the financially or the economically viable as a business model. And then comes the scale part, and the scale should happen with dignity, which means all these workers are provided the formalization, basic training, and healthcare services, fair wages, and this is kind of we look for when we are funding any of these models. And I think one of our portfolio companies, Sumita and Rangsutra, is one of such model we have funded, where artisans have been integrated right from the formalization into the company itself as a ownership level. So this is the kind of model we fund when we look at the communities and the viability of these models. And on the technical assistance, we see there are quite a few gaps even when we are evaluating these companies, whether be it in textile waste or in other segments also. And one part obviously is the investment readiness of these companies, but other part is lots of missing pieces, whether it's on the traceability, whether it is on, because when we look for the investment readiness of these companies also become eligible for working with large brands as their supplier or in any other way for partnership with these brands, which by way of embedding these, kind of technical assistance into it, become their model more financially sustainable when they start working with these large brands and large clients. And the technical assistance piece on the textile waste is what we are trying to do is we are looking at what are the various gaps in the sector on the organization level, and also try to look that all the ecosystem partners, whether it's the waste workers, whether it's these waste organizations who are working with these waste workers, or whether the recycler, funder, or all the other ecosystem partners are working at one particular goal rather than working on silos. And this is what we are trying to achieve using our technical assistance.
Wonderful. Coming to you, Satish, Tamil Nadu is undoubtedly one of the most important textile clusters in India, in Tirupur, right? And it spans across manufacturing, processing, and even waste management and recycling. And hence, this market becomes very, very important from just transition perspective in textiles. So can you share with us, right, what kind of support has Tamil Nadu government provided to this segment, and how has it helped these kind of startups scale in that region? And what else can we do in other states, right? What learnings can we pick up from Tamil Nadu so that they can be replicated in other states, or even at a central level? What do you think, would you suggest?
Sure. Thank you, Janvi. So just to set the context, the Green Climate Fund, we have defined 3 numbers for the fund. It is a $250 million fund trying to abate 25 million tons of CO2 and help recycling 2.5 million tons of waste. We are looking at broadly 4 verticals. One is energy transition, 2 EV, third is circularity, and fourth is sustainable agriculture. So apart from EV, all other 3 sectors, we can easily map to sustainable business model, the textile value chain. So that is how we are looking at the Green Climate Fund. In terms of government support, Janvi, there is a complete support across the funding spectrum. So you have a support for incubation. There is an incubation center in Tirupur, which is funded by central government, Atal Incubation Center. So state government is also supporting it. There are 2 dozen startups doing sustainable textile ventures there. So that is on the incubation part. Then on the startup space, we have a startup TN organization which provides mentoring and investor access to all these startups. Then there is a concessional loan provider, Tamil Nadu Investment Corporation, which provides concession loans to all these startups. Then you have VC and PE funds where we come in. We have the Green Climate Fund. There is another fund we manage, Tamil Nadu Emerging Sector Seed Fund. So these 2 funds operate as PE and VC funds for these startups. And once we scale it up to that level, then it can go to the capital markets and do it. So what we have done uniquely in Tamil Nadu, there is an intervention across the funding spectrum for all these startups. So which is what I would like if other states could emulate and model it on, it could work. Thank you, Janvi.
Thank you so much, Satish. Coming back to you, Akash, we spoke earlier about sustainability and just transition in the fashion value chain. And there also are currently very limited mandates, right, or regulatory push around this space. There is a lot of investment activity, a lot of interest from impact investors and from mainstream investors alike, but we see limited intervention in terms of regulation. And also from the brand's perspective, while there are sustainability targets by brands, but we don't see a lot of on-ground execution for adoption of sustainable practices. And just picking from our experience in Circulate Capital, our model is actually quite interesting and unique from a private equity lens, because our LPs or investors comprise of corporates and brands such as Coke, Pepsi, Unilever, P&G, etc. And they've all invested in our fund because they want to further their cause of sustainability and enhance the ecosystem of recycling infrastructure in plastics, particularly in the emerging markets. And hence, we've been able to play a catalytic role, not just in providing financial support to companies in this space, but also help them work with each of these brands and build the right kind of products for them so that their materials can be taken off by these brands in their packaging content. And hence, this has really boosted the recycling ecosystem in the areas we are investing, in addition to the EPR regulations that exist in the countries that we are investing. Now, just picking from there, right, and the lack of regulatory push and brand involvement in the textile space, what has your experience been? Because you have worked in the water space, as you mentioned earlier, the treatment of wastewater and industrial pollutants from factories, right? And there's an example called Indira Water in your portfolio. They've also been working with some denim manufacturers. So that's an interesting intervention by brands in the value chain. Can you talk more about this project and how this kind of push from brands can support the textile value chains in the future as well?
Yeah, certainly. And I think, like you said, producers, brands, and corporates are a key part of this ecosystem. It can't just be government-driven or consumer-driven. And while many of them have stated broader sort of sustainability goals, sometimes that doesn't always necessarily translate into actionable sort of initiatives, as well as making sort of decisions at sort of a business level, especially when one looks at things like green premiums and discounts and what to adopt if it's too early stage and not commercially viable just yet. Like you guys, we work a lot with corporates. Our core backers are corporates, but also from sort of sectors like steel and cement, in addition to sort of consumer. And it's hugely important to bring them into the loop. And so even outside of just the LP base, corporates that we work with, we try to do things like JVs with them or have them work with our portfolio companies. For Indira Water in particular, Indira Water was our first investment through the fund. It's a wastewater treatment technology company that uses a process called electrocoagulation to treat very dirty industrial wastewater. They were part of Fashion for Goods cohort, and in fact, their first application was specifically within the textile space and specifically within denim and jeans company, because that is some of the worst quality water that exists. And they can treat very, very dirty water. In fact, that's sort of their IP. Since then, they've expanded to other sectors. But I think that the key point here is water quality in textiles is something that is extremely poor. When you think about dyeing, especially chemical dyeing, it's very hard to get it out of the water. Jeans companies especially have very polluted water. Now the government has actually come out with norms around zero liquid discharge, which relate to basically the water quality that you can put back out into the ground. And so the norm by the Pollution Control Board is that you have to treat the water before you dispose of it, or you have to reuse a certain amount of water, which has been a great sort of tailwind for Indira. Now they're working with Taj Hotels, Unilever, Xylem, Tata Steel, and many other companies, because PCB has also come down quite hard on these regulations. So we've seen that be a huge catalyst. And similarly, in sort of plastics around EPR and bottle to bottle, you've seen government policy really being a catalyst. I think we need something similar in the textiles space. And importantly, bringing corporates into the equation. So this JV that we've done, we've launched, and this is for scope 3 emissions to replace coal using agri-biomass. They've guaranteed the offtake at a certain price, and they have the farmers that we're taking the biomass from. And so it's a very circular sort of initiative. And that's come from the promoter group itself. And so I think when you try to de-risk these things and make them commercially viable, many other people will come in. So right now we are looking at grants from global governments as well as from brands, because us combined with them have kind of minimized the risk to a certain extent. And so both through Indira, which now raised capital from a fund called Emerald Ventures in Singapore and is now doing very well. After some of these things become de-risked and after early players come in, I definitely think you'll see sort of more acceleration and growth. But someone has to take that first step. And so even with this hemp company that we are working on, we've tried to identify partners on the offtake side of things as well. We will be sort of the largest investor, and we are taking the lead role. And we are looking to try to build the company together with the founder, who has a lot of experience and is actually here, and I would love to introduce everyone to him later on. And so I think the point is someone has to take that risk step, but then bringing corporates to the equation and hopefully government policy can also help provide a catalyst to it is the right way to go.
Thank you so much. And picking from there and talking about government policy and moving to you, Raj, you've invested in companies such as Hasiru Dala, which began with municipal solid waste and plastics, and now also adding textiles to their waste streams, which is now a growing trend amongst several waste management companies, which is very, very positive. But as we touched upon, in the plastic space, EPR has been instrumental in mandating collection, recycling, right, and also strengthening the supply chain as well as driving the market demand for recycled materials. If you can help the audience understand EPR better, right, and help us understand how EPR has helped these enterprises on the ground boost recycling in different commodities, and how it has built investor confidence, including yourself, and how this can be replicated in textiles.
Sure, yeah, thank you. I think EPR in plastic was a game changer because it created that pull-based demand for the material as well as for the collection. So EPR puts the responsibility on brands to ensure the collection of the same amount of plastic or the waste being generated. And that kind of generated stable cash flow position in some of these early stage models, and we have funded few of them. Janvi has funded from the Circulate Capital, have funded many of them. And that kind of generated stable cash flow based model in these companies, which helped boost investor confidence for funding into these sectors as a one stable revenue stream. And then there came lots of recycling models which helped in, and brands also pushed on that okay, they want to take their target to include 10% of blending with virgin plastic and recycled plastic to 30% or whatever, and that helped in kind of making these models sustainable. And now probably what is happening is that EPR may not look like a significant revenue in stream in many of these companies, but initial base which was provided by EPR helped for first 4 or 5 years these companies to make their model sustainable and reach a certain scale which made basically their model sustainable. And that is what probably we may need in textile also. It may not be as simple because there are many challenges in form of recycling, material, blend, and obviously we had those challenges in plastic also, but probably the material challenge is much more higher in the textile space compared to the plastic space. But again, probably the EPR in this sector can also help in making some of these model. And as Janvi mentioned, that many of our company which we funded and who are working in plastic have ventured into the textile, at least in post-consumer textile waste collection, segregation, and that makes sense for them because that brings economy of scale, collecting different kind of waste, whether it's e-waste, textile, plastic waste, and making their unit economics and business model more sustainable and economically viable. But again, EPR probably can help these companies to make their textile division more sustainable and more economically viable before they reach a certain level of scale, which can help them in again becoming unit economics positive on their own, and then probably EPR can be phased out or kind of lowered. The value of the EPR revenue can become lower over the time. Yeah, I think I think EPR is something which can probably play a more of a nudging to the sector from the brand to the these companies who are working from the collection, segregation, and recycling.
Thank you. And coming back to you, Hardik, Spectrum Impact is in a unique position because you can deploy equity, debt, structured finance, for-profit, for the for-profit organizations. And you also channel philanthropic capital through grants and donations. So there are many ways, and that makes you very flexible capital provider. Can you help us understand the role of such flexible capital in just transition in finance? And how these different pools of capital, right, philanthropic, catalytic, commercial, they all come together, right? And please feel free to share your experiences in how these have worked together and bringing about just transition.
Thank you, Janvi, for the question. Yep. So what we like to say, right, and the family also likes to get this point out, is that a role of a family office here is to first and foremost provide patient capital in whatever way and whatever way or shape it is. And you're right, the flexibility that you've mentioned, right, and we have seen and experienced that in multiple ways, is because from all the discussions here, clearly Akash has mentioned how once the startups are supported, right, and they start doing well, then they can be taken care of by better and better capital and governments. But to start, right, like what we have seen is being the catalytic and being the patient capital, we have been able to be with the startups right at their beginning. We have possibly been the first, a couple of checks, maybe after the friends and family checks that they would have received. Honestly, with 85 plus portfolio companies that we are involved in right now, I would say we have not taken even a single complete exit out. So that kind of patience definitely is needed, where you give these new technologies which are not fully baked in yet, which might take some time before they are ready and and appetizing for the VCs to come in, right? So to just de-risk them from that 5 to 7 year cycles where they have to prove and they have to get the investor and exit. So that definitely is one role that we are basically doing with our equity investments. Debt on the other end is something that we have realized is every startup at some point is going to be make or break point is going to come to them on their working capital. Not unfortunately there are some NBFCs where startups can possibly go to, but for a very new companies, the kind of data and kind of due diligence that they would be able to do so that they can get a high volume working capital made available has not been proven, right? So what we have also been able to do is we have been able to provide the accessible capital. That accessible capital via debt has been has helped quite a few startups to cross that valley of death, without which they might have not survived, even though the technology was doing good. So that's where our debt has been also instrumental. On the grant side, what we really do is we don't keep the grants for startups directly, but we like to work with a lot of institutions who are doing the good work of reaching out, getting the research done, getting the just phase in. So while we work with them, we enable them to do the good work, and via them we basically distribute our grants to have a good understanding on different topics, right? Textile being one of it, geological, hydrogen being other, geothermal being the rest of it. So grants are mostly used to enable the on-ground organizations, which is where the initial part of startups also come through. So that's how we are looking at the flexibility, and that's how we have been supporting the ecosystem overall.
That's indeed a lot of flexibility coming from the same pool of capital, and all institutional investors sitting in the room would agree how hard it is to meet the mandates from our LPs and stick to them while also walking the path of providing financial returns as well as impact. And then now, again, moving to the other end of the spectrum where there's Tamil Nadu government, providing financial and technical support. Satish, what kind of constraints do you face, right, when you deploy capital from representing a government body? And if you had the flexibility as Hardik has, what else could you have done?
See, broadly, I would like to see 4 interventions. One is obviously this EPR. It has worked perfectly well in plastics, batteries, tires. So we can start off with a small scale. So in plastic, it was implemented in 3 stages. So the first stage, it was just collection. Second stage was recycling. And third stage, usage of the recycled content. So something we can think of that staged implementation in textile also. The second intervention I would like to see is this mega industrial textile park. The concept has come in. If we can marry the concept of net zero industrial park with this, we embed sustainability right from the beginning of these parks, and MSMEs can get into those facilities and do. So that is the second intervention I would like to have. The third is incentive for buying some of these machineries for decarbonization. This wind energy sector in India was, the boom happened just because of accelerated depreciation. So some kind of incentive for accelerated depreciation for machinery which are used in textile for sustainable dyeing or recycling, if that can be there, that will give a fillip to the sector. The fourth is taxonomy for circular economy. So we just started with climate finance. There is a draft paper which has come out, but if something can come up for taxonomy for circular economy, that would help in pulling capital for some of the startups we are evaluating. So these 4 broad interventions, if the government support is there, I think it will be wonderful to evaluate and deploy some capital there.
Thanks, Satish. These are wonderful ideas, and hope we can convey all of these to the ministries, and more action can be taken in these areas. Since we're running out of time, I will not indulge more discussions amongst ourselves, but open the floor to questions, if any, from the audience. No questions? Okay. Thank you all.
Raj and Satish for those insightful points, and Janvi for tying it all together. This discussion definitely helped us understand some of the interesting insights that the investors had to offer, what are the challenges that they are facing, and also some of those forward-looking recommendations and interventions that are needed to scale some of these investments as well. With the investor perspectives now in mind, we'll now turn to a real-world case study, an example that has already been implemented on the ground by some of our investors, which is Upaya Social Ventures, where they're truly aligning, I would say, capital with purpose, particularly in the area of textile waste management. Please join me in welcoming Shruti Goel, co-CEO of Upaya Social Ventures, and Akansha Shenoy, Associate Data and Insights at Upaya Social Ventures. They'll be presenting about their technical assistance facility for textile waste management and how they leveraged innovative financing mechanisms for this to happen.
Thank you. Okay, this is live. Hi everyone. This is great to be present amongst a group which really feels passionately about the sector, and for IIC to put it together and help us frame the what of what are we dealing with very, very eloquently, and to hear Mr. Kansal in the morning with all the policy work that is blessing the sector in a way. So what Akansha and I are going to present is the how part of how Upaya Social Ventures, as an impact first investor, is trying to do a baby step here to see how we can structure finance in a way that helps a sector as nascent as textile waste management. The focus of my presentation would be on the financial instrument or the structuring of the capital here. And then I would like to really engage in a discussion about questions you may have or inputs you may have for our model per se. I'm accompanied by my colleague Akansha, who's a social finance expert and works closely with me on structuring these kind of so-called innovative solutions. The title of the presentation is Innovating Together. Can we go one slide before? Yeah, give me the clicker. Thank you. It is innovating together for a just transition is fashion because we can't make it together. We can't make it alone. And the idea is to unlock investor action. Upaya is an impact-first investor. Our mission is to fight poverty with dignified jobs. So essentially, we are sector agnostic when we started 14 years back. We started with the mission to say, we will invest in any company which can create jobs for the poor at scale and quality. Over 14 years, the sectors which have given us greatest additionality for our investment is waste management, rural processing, manufacturing, artisan-based companies, etc. But waste management happens to give us the maximum additionality to us in terms of scale of jobs. We have over 7 investments in waste management now and around 7,000 jobs being created. Also, waste management gives us the depth of impact, which is the highest amount of income quality or increase in income is registered by waste management of upwards of 80% by our investments. Next slide, please. I can take this. Do this, right? So when we started this aspect is that, like I said, we are invested in waste management. We have a portfolio of waste management companies, and they were looking at plastic waste. They were looking at, like the panelists before said, the company started with waste management. It's not specified by textile waste only or plastic waste only. And we invested in a few companies there, and they have been working with a few partners here in the room as pilots on textile waste, or textile waste came across as a problem bag. We pick up waste and textile waste is a problem bag. We don't know what to do. It goes to the landfill. The need was from the sector to say, how do you move from a linear to a circular economy in textile waste? How do we rethink production processes? How do we reduce waste generation, limit the use of virgin materials, but also how do we unlock the potential of textile waste? As Upaya, our focus and what we were questioning on our side was, how do we make this work from a sanitation worker perspective, and how can we add another income stream to them? They're already going and picking up waste, but can textile waste really unlock another income stream for the sanitation workers per se, and to participate meaningfully in the circular value chain and not get left behind? And so we looked at prioritizing workforce development, how do we ensure safe, fair, dignified working conditions, and embed deeply into the business models, not as a side impact or a separate project, an impact project to be developed. And looking at the worker empowerment as a core part of the success, like we heard in the morning that worker voice or the community voice is an important part of just transition. So how do we bring all of this together with Upaya's positioning as an investor in the company where we have skin in the game? We are looking at exits. We are looking at financial profitability of these companies. So that's when we designed something called a technical assistance facility. And why is it a technical assistance facility? Because it is a facility developed for Upaya's portfolio companies. And right now we are working with 3 of our portfolio companies, which is Sahas, Bangalore-based organization, more than 100 crores revenue, Greenworms and V-Voice. Greenworms is in Kerala and V-Voice is in Rajasthan. The anchor partner here is Loudest Foundation, where we design the whole philanthropic, the catalytic capital providers. And the advisory partner for us on knowledge management is Sagana Advisory. We have technical advisors and a resource partner. Technical advisors are Fashion for Good and Ramya Materials, and resource partner is Canopy Planet. What is this facility? It is a $1.5 million facility that supports sanitation worker first enterprise in India to meaningfully engage in textile waste management. In a nutshell, and in a room full of investors here, it's a seed capital to provide companies to start experimenting with textile waste as a revenue stream and not as an impact project, or to take their impact project learnings to a revenue stream model. What we believe is that enterprises working with waste supply chains can turn textile waste challenge into an opportunity, solving both for environmental and social issues. What is the overview here? What do we do? What we do is the capital, the concessionary capital here comes from our partners like Loudest Foundation, and we set up the first of its kind textile waste management unit. We catalyze knowledge from partnerships like Fashion for Good, which is a global network looking at innovations to come into textile waste management. Ramya Materials, which is like doing the R&D for different materials to come in, and what kind of materials are possible for this supply chain to work on. So they are working one-on-one with each of these 3 companies, looking at their supplies, looking at what is possible, and Sagana Advisory to capture the learnings here, the technology and the networks. What have we done so far? We launched this in March 2024. We formalized these collaborations that you saw on the last slide, and we deployed capital to 3 portfolio companies of Upaya, and the structure I'll come to later. And also we launched a learnings report, which is available to download for everyone on our website. But what are the goals we are trying to drive through? And some of it we heard this morning. What we have done is basically put those in action. What we are driving is dignified jobs creation in textile waste management, financially sustainable textile waste management units, diversion of textile waste from landfills, and strengthening the circular economy ecosystem. How do we do this, and what is the approach that we centered this whole experiment with? The approach is impact-linked finance. As Upaya, as an impact investor, since 14 years, we have been measuring impact of each investment we have made. Every portfolio, every investment we make, we do a baseline, midline, and endline survey of the job holders on the not just quantity, but the quality of jobs created. So we thought of that, why not put the same foundation, but extend it to the textile waste management. Now, impact-linked finance as an approach is relevant for scaling business models in general, which are very nascent and up for experimentation. It is an effective way of aligning positive impact with economic viability and lies on the intersection of blended finance, impact investing, and results-based financing. Now, this is a bit of a context setting here, that why it is an approach and not a product, because it needs to be assessed for each of your use case to fit. In our case, in the case of textile waste management, this is where we thought the alignment is with the availability of data, availability of processes, investor intent, which is Upaya, and the intent of the founders. We felt that this is the right financial instrument to land on, and we did not start the other way around, which is which blended finance, or how can we fit blended finance where. So the instrument came after the product, the problem statement. And also there are 5 main use cases that are generally globally spoken about for impact-linked finance. Unlocking potential, impact potential, where there is a commercially strong business but has not thought about impact intentionally but wants to. Then there is an enterprise which is committed to deep impact but does not, on profitability front, is struggling. Then there are targeting specific impact, like you're working on general impact but you want to now focus on a specific impact like gender, or coming to specific impact areas, or you want to encourage continued impact. So all of these can have a different set of impact-linked finance structuring. In our case, in the case of textile waste management here, what we used is kick-starting impactful solutions, where the enterprise can provide data, can provide for a new product service, but requires a seed capital or a kickstart capital to launch and implement. The structure, how it looks like, the structure is the donor anchor partner here for the TAF is Loudest Foundation. With their philanthropic capital 1, it goes to Upaya Social Ventures. From Upaya up to $200,000 at concessionary interest rate goes to the waste management enterprise partner, who's our portfolio company. It is also then the technical assistance in terms of what I showed you from partners like FFG, Ramya Materials, etc. 3. And then it goes to 4, which is the companies implement the textile waste management work. And there is impact measurement on step number 5 by an impact evaluator, and then the evidence of results on step number 6 is categorized on 3 aspects: business performance, social impact, and environmental impact. Once that is done, there is a performance incentive of $50,000 to the companies, which is step number 7 up. And then a repayment of principal with interest waived on the basis of these 3 aspects, the 6, in a way of interest rate subvention, if you think about that. If each company achieves the results on these 3 categories, then Upaya will waive the interest on that basis up to 0% interest, as well as give a kicker from the performance incentive of $50,000. So this is in a way results-based financing, but we want to call it even more nuanced, which is impact linked, because we can trust the data. And then the money, the principal amount, once it comes back, goes to the facility, and Upaya can recycle or invest it into similar companies. However, this is patient. We are not in a hurry. We know these things take time, but we are also garnering support from the ecosystem to see where all other partners can come and be a part of this to make these 3 companies as of now profitable on textile waste management. What are we incentivizing? Dignified jobs creation, diversion of textile waste from landfills, financially sustainable units. The way the metric score on incentive is 40% weightage to dignified jobs creation, because that's also Upaya's mission, 40% weightage on diversion of textile waste from landfills, and 20% on the financial sustainability, because it is truly important. So this is the metric structure for the instrument. However, the targets for each company was decided with them in collaboration, in consultation over months. Why this structure? It aligns cost of capital to impact. It is a simple design, easy for everyone to follow over years, again and again. It aligns targets with enterprises' growth potential, so we are not pushing them. However, there is an incentive to go for. It's not a grant project. And there is recycling of capital for other investors or other like-minded philanthropic flexible capital providers to be part of the initiative. What are our learnings, or the key things that have stood out for us so far is the philanthropic funding as anchor allows for de-risking. Upaya's understanding of its portfolio companies reinforce the funder confidence. We are sitting on the boards, we are doing the monthly calls, quarterly calls, we are sitting on the impact data, financial data. We know where the risks could be. Also, Upaya ensured there was a big process of educating the companies about an impact-linked finance structure. What are you signing up for? Why are we saying this? And that took months. We didn't anticipate this, but it took time to get everyone on board on the terms. We could leverage our IMM practice very, very easily. Also for climate, we are learning from the environment, we are learning what can we adapt, but towards the goal. We are learning that capital is just one part of the solution. We need market linkages, we need, once this supply is streamlined of waste, how do we partner with brands, how do we get all the market for the companies. So that's where we are, and enterprise success is, the support is being provided for research, innovation, and the policy environment with partnerships like IIC, we look for voicing our learnings. That's what we have done so far. Thank you. Any questions? I'll be happy now. I don't know now. We have time. Okay. No. Varun says we can only do it in the roundtable discussion.
5 minutes late, but
okay.
We'll just allow 5 minutes for people to settle in. I'm sure we have the roundtable discussion also, but people want to speak, so we'll try and get more them inside. And Shruti, many congratulations. Akansha, many congratulations. I could see so many people opening their phones to click pictures of it as well. So I'm sure that we are doing some great work there. And people also navigated that. I saw people with laptops on the websites as well. So great work. Thank you very much for taking the time and taking through the findings as well. Really, really helpful. I hope we move some needle on this as well. And this case study also proves that we can do something in the sector and many investors can do it further as well. And staying on the theme of on-ground implementation, it is equally important to highlight some of the work that is already done by some of the conglomerates and some of the other ecosystem players as well. So we'll stay with that theme. Our second panel discussion, which you can see on the screen now, it aims to spotlight some of these successful examples of community-centric approaches, how they are doing it, how they can be scaled, what are some of the challenges that they face when financing for it, because we did hear the investors, but it is equally important to hear from the other side of the story on what are the actual requirements. So allow me in welcoming our panelists for the discussion. We have Gauri Sharma, General Manager, ESG and Innovation, Shahi Exports; Jyoti Narayan Kapoor, Country Director, India at Better Cotton Initiative; Lakshmi Poti, Managing Director, Lotus India; Lavanya Garg, Director of Growth, Good Business Lab. And moderating this panel will be Ashlyn from Impact Investing Institute. Ashlyn, over to you.
All right. Just confusing me with names. That's okay. That's fine. Super. So look, good afternoon, everybody. Really happy to be moderating this panel. You'll heard me speak earlier, so I won't do too much more introducing myself, but I am a Senior Program Manager at the Impact Investing Institute, looking specifically at our Just Transition program. So as Varun has outlined, today's session, we're looking to kind of gather, I guess, on the ground perspectives as we talk to Just Transition. I know we are running slightly over time, so I think I'm going to just get straight into it. And I'm going to put my panelists under pressure straight away. And I'm going to ask you just to do a very brief little introduction for yourself so that the audience know who you are. So Gauri, we might start with you, if that's okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Gauri. I'm the General Manager of ESG and Innovation at Shahi Exports. Shahi is India's largest apparel manufacturer with over 45 factories in India, 4 textile mills. And yeah, as my title says, I work a lot on ESG and integrating innovation into the company.
Hi, my name is Jyoti. I'm the Country Director for Better Cotton Initiative for India, and most of you would have heard of us. We are the world's largest cotton sustainability program, and India has around 1 million farmers who support us in this. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah. I'm Lakshmi Poti, and I lead Loudus India LLP, the entity that services Loudus Foundation's work in India. And as I'm based in India, which is quite a critical geography for the fashion industry, I also lead Loudus's program on fashion globally.
Hi everyone, I'm Lavanya. I work as Director of Growth at Good Business Lab. We're a global NGO that works with businesses that employ blue-collar workers and show that there's a business case and financial return to investing in worker well-being.
Super, that's great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to get straight in. We're going to start a little bit looking at some of our kind of positioning in terms of on-the-ground realities and what are we talking about when we speak to Just Transition. So Jyoti, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. And maybe you could tell us in the audience, what does Just Transition mean to you and your work at the Better Cotton Initiative? And maybe also in tying that in, based on your experience, what has worked well in promoting sustainable cotton cultivation in India with that kind of Just Transition lens?
So as I mentioned, being the world's largest cotton sustainability program, in India we work with smallholder farmers. And we are basically making sure that the farmers are not at any kind of risk when they are participating in a sustainability program. and that market linkages are, it is market driven. So basically all the actors in a value chain support sustainability. So while the farmers are growing cotton on sustainability parameters, there is a market demand led by brands which support that uptake from them, because farmers would be interested more in the market part. And we, getting the funding from the brands, are able to support the sustainability program, so the farmers don't invest in it. And it has led to results, because we have things like 54% reduction in pesticides and water reduction and livelihood going up. So there are many identified successes of this model.
Super, that's great. And yeah, it's really interesting to hear kind of the work you're doing in kind of bringing that together with that kind of just transition, environmental and social considerations. Maybe Gauri, coming to yourself next, and looking more at, as you mentioned, Shahi being kind of the largest manufacturer and export, so we're kind of taking a slightly different lens. And for the benefit of the audience, can you maybe talk us through then, with Shahi in mind, what just transition means to you, and kind of what are the first steps that you've taken in that space?
Yeah, sure. As I was mentioning earlier, Shahi is obviously a large organization, and all of our customers are also large global brands. When we think about just transition, as we were talking about earlier, about 70% of the workforce is female. Shahi itself has 100,000 employees. So I think taking care of the workforce and investing in worker well-being has come quite naturally to the company because of how it's structured and how many people are employed. So there are dedicated teams within Shahi that just look at this worker well-being lens. We work closely with Good Business Lab as well on this, and Lavanya will talk more about that work. And there are dedicated soft skills training, mental health programs, workers' health programs, worker voice. So there's a dedicated team just doing research on these subjects, creating interventions, working with experts like Good Business Lab. Another sort of lens that I would like to offer on just transition is often when we talk about decarbonization or initiatives in this space, we have a very brand-oriented or global north lens. So a lot of sustainability strategies, frameworks come from the global north from brands, whereas suppliers and supply chain is where the execution and implementation needs to happen, because that's where most of the impact is, that's where the workers are. But we don't see a lot of co-creation happening in this space with supply chain partners. We are often given the mandate, given the targets, given the initiatives. So when talking about just transition, I would also encourage, organizations, investors to work more closely with the supply chain in co-creation. If I could just take a couple of minutes to highlight the projects that Shahi has worked on in this space. If we just talk about circularity, one of the projects that we have done is we've created standard waste segregation SOPs across factories. But we also translated that into action by training management, cutting floor in charge, and workers on those SOPs to make sure that they are upskilled and ready for segregation. So that was one way to make sure they are part of the process and made sure that they understood what it takes to be a circular supply chain. On decarbonization, some of the initiatives that we have taken is, of course, moving towards renewable electricity, but more recently, phasing out coal from all our boilers in our factories. And most of our textile mills will also do that by the end of the year. So here also there is an opportunity to think about social impact in terms of when all industries are moving towards biomass, where does the farmer impact come in, and sort of tracking that alongside building the biomass supply chain. We've also worked a lot on figuring out what are the different ways to reduce water, energy, and chemicals in processing, because textile processing is one of the most resource-intensive aspects of textile manufacturing. Here we work with a lot of startups that were mentioned at the beginning, like Circ, Indra Water. We've done quite a few trials with such startups. But where the challenge is coming in right now is a lot of these startups have a good environmental impact, but they need that extra support to build the business case for a supplier to adopt them. they need support for scaling, and they also need grant support to do pilots and demonstrations. So I'll leave it at that for now and then maybe come back to some of the other insights in the next question.
Super, super. That was great, Gauri, and like really interesting to hear from your side in terms of the structure and the different aspects you can put in place there, and maybe that place-based piece is something we might pick up on from an investor consideration perspective. Just, I guess, drawing on your points on worker well-being and maybe coming to you, Lavanya, and your work at Good Business Lab. I think it'd be really great to hear, kind of building on those points, what do you think Just Transition means in the context of worker well-being, and maybe some of the work that you've done at Good Business Lab towards that as well.
Thanks for that. And I think Gauri and Shahi are a shining example, and she's covered a lot of what our work looks like in practice. So we look at Just Transition with a simple yet often undervalued idea that investing in worker well-being generates financial returns. We don't see it as a trade-off, and over the last decade, we've done research in labor-intensive industries, including the fashion supply chain, that shows when firms invest in workers, whether it's gender equity, migration, mental health, climate resilience, it actually improves productivity, it improves attendance, it reduces attrition. So it's not an either-or in our ideology, it's a win-win situation. And Just Transition to us essentially means that you center equity, you center worker needs when you're designing solutions. And when you do that right from the beginning, it's actually less costly in the long run. Also, when we design solutions, designing for context is very important. Gauri already mentioned how a lot of the supply chain is here, and we need solutions that are rooted in the local context. So I'll take gender as an example. We heard about farmers, and a lot of you may not know that a lot of women in the agricultural supply chain are actually not counted in the formal labor force. They do a lot of informal work. So say you hear stats of farmer suicides, actually that invisibilizes a lot of women. So when you're designing for farmers, you have to start there. You have to make the invisible visible. Whereas when you go to a garment factory like Shahi, a lot of the frontline workforce is women, 60 to 70%. But as you move up the hierarchy, you'll see supervisors and managers mostly being men. So when we design for that context, the question we ask is, how do you retain women in that setup, and how do you ensure they grow and thrive in the workplace? And I'll share two examples from our research. One is on mental health. So we've designed a low-cost, scalable program called the Buddy System program that essentially trains young, new migrant workers with longer tenured migrant workers. And through a large-scale randomized control trial, we've seen that this doesn't just improve social well-being of the workers, it actually makes them 12% more productive and less likely to quit. Similarly, we've seen when firms adopt energy-efficient lighting, it doesn't just lead to energy savings, it also reduces the temperature on the factory floor, which makes workers productive. And in our study, we found that the average garment firm gains about $7,500 just from investing in energy-efficient lighting from productivity gains, which are often not counted in investment decisions. So when we look at decarbonization, when we look at Just Transition, we need to ask who's being left out of the conversation, how can we design for workers, how can we reskill workers for jobs of the future, and that is essentially how we look at this issue.
Super, it's brilliant, and it's great to get that context as well, and kind of connecting the dots with productivity, which, as you said, I don't think we naturally make that connection or talk about it enough when we're talking about the investment opportunity. Maybe Lakshmi, coming to yourself. So Laudes, have been running a dedicated program for fashion for a long time now, and supporting several players, I guess, across the ecosystem. So maybe with that lens of being an ecosystem builder, can you maybe share some of your learnings in the context of Just Transition and what it means in this critical sector?
Yeah, thanks. And I think, Gauri, Jyoti, and Lavanya just talked about some solid examples there. At Laudes, we've been supporting the fashion industry on a climate, nature, people angle for the last decade. So we started with a lot of work on cotton back in the day, so BCI, Organic Cotton Accelerator. A lot of this came into being in bringing together the climate nature people angle. So what I mean there is, how do you center farmers in the conversation? How do you bring them to be decision makers? Because the transition is upon them. So if you don't equip them, then you're not going to have a transition that works. So an example there was, working with NGOs in India and other places in the world on the farmer-producer organizations, which were very community-centric to begin with, but how do you provide access to markets? And that is a big gap for them in terms of investments. So there are examples now of, say, organizations like ASA in Madhya Pradesh, who've actually incubated entities like Plowmen, which service the farm sector now, which are owned by the farmers, but generate crores in profits, and is an investable opportunity. So a lot of the models that I will speak to in what Loudus has supported over the years is really where we feel there's an opportunity to invest now. So the role of philanthropy is, for us, bringing together models that have the vision to scale, laying the groundwork and grounding it in what we call now a just transition, but that's really the opportunity, right? So you bring in innovations. We set up Fashion for Good in 2017. That has an innovation lens. You need technologies. I think you heard in the last panels as well. But how do you integrate and bring the people along as well in deploying the innovations? You can set up waste recycling facilities, but if you don't do that in a way that has clean energy, has worker safety conditions, has ventilation and all of that, then you're not solving for the larger circularity, at the end of the day. So for us, I think it's important to look at the supply chain holistically and where people play along it. So right from farmers to waste workers to workers in factories, but suppliers themselves. So for example, what Gauri talked about, how do you bring the suppliers together so they have the voice? Because at the end of the day, they're implementing the transition. And all of this then will allow you to make an investable case, because it needs to work at the end of the day, and, using a business model as well. So yeah, I think we'll speak a little bit more as you go into it.
Yeah, super, and you've just led me in very nicely. It's definitely not like we talked about this, but very nicely into this next section where we'll talk a little bit more to that financing requirement and what does that look like from a kind of mechanisms perspective. So maybe I'm going to go to Gauri first, Jyoti. Just in relation to Shahi's journey, I guess, what has your experience been like when it comes to financing a just transition? I guess moving from kind of sustainable manufacturing, but whilst keeping workers and communities at the core. And then maybe touching on where do you see, there's some challenges there and barriers, but where do you see the opportunities then for investors in this space?
Yes. So I would say that for Shahi, because we're a large manufacturer, maybe what I say isn't relevant for MSMEs, right? So I would want to just make sure we understand that. So for Shahi as a large supplier, a lot of the developments have happened taking sustainability as a general business investment, right? Like moving towards renewable electricity. We have invested in around 155 megawatts of solar. It was purely a business decision, keeping in mind our values as a business on ethics and sustainability. With the right subsidies from the government, the right kind of operational financing, debt financing coming in, we were able to kind of execute on solar and expand and keep expanding on that. Where I see the sort of gap and opportunity, I would say, is, for example, thinking beyond debt. A lot of, even for large suppliers, but even for MSMEs, taking on more debt isn't ideal. And they are looking at other options, but maybe they are not in touch with the investor network or are not aware, what all sort of options are out there. For example, we were, I think, Peak Sustainability Ventures was talking about Indra Water, right? We were able to do a successful pilot with them through the support of Circular Apparel Innovation Factory and a small grant just to do just a demo. And that gave assurance to our management that this technology works, and then, potentially further investment could come in. The other gap or opportunity that I would say is sometimes these investments lead to increase in OPEX, right? Like if you see, there is a huge pressure on suppliers to decarbonize ASAP, and this is coming from brands to completely phase out coal from their supply chains as soon as this year. So there are suppliers now, moving to biomass very quickly at a rapid pace. But this can lead to and does lead to an increase in energy cost compared to coal. So there is OPEX financing is a model that suppliers have advocated for with brands. Then I would say even for startups, one of the startups we've been working with is called AltMat. They're an agri-residue-based fiber. They're an Indian startup, very good. We've been working with them for 4 years, doing intensive R&D, trying to convert their fiber into fabrics that global brands will adopt. It meets their quality standards. But over 4 years, we're still struggling to see that commercial adoption into brand collections. So here, I would say what we've observed over 3 or 4 years of working with startups, there are limits sometimes to what a supplier can do with innovators, particularly dye stuffs, microbial dyes, algae-based dyes, bio-based finishes, but also next-gen materials. Suppliers are well positioned to do the trials, the R&D, create swatches, samples, garments that meet industry standards. But after a point, what we are lacking is the brand pull. So somewhere, I don't know where the investors fit in here, whether it's working with the brands to help them finance some of this, because these come at premiums, or working with these really promising innovators, India and globally, to help them scale or overcome some of their infrastructural, operational, or quality challenges. So broadly speaking, these are some of the opportunities I see. One last thing is actually the high capex investment. So when I spoke about biomass, that is something that is being driven because currently in the short term, that is a very viable solution. But for the future, like as Shahi, we are also thinking about options of electrification. Can we move to heat pumps, electric boilers, energy storage, alternative fuels? There's lots of people working in this space, but limited industry deployment as of now. But if you look at something like heat pumps, even though there's viability, it's a huge investment, like double-digit millions of dollars, even though there is potentially ROI. But if you do want industry adoption, then how can we sort of come together and show some proof of concept to scale these sort of solutions further?
Super, super. That's great. You give us loads of points to pick up on there and some really interesting points around kind of what you can do as suppliers, maybe some points that we'll pick up on and where investors might come into that discussion as well. Jyoti, I'd like to come back to you in relation to Better Cotton Initiative and the same kind of question around what is your experience, and maybe if you could talk to us a little bit about some of the financing models that you've either used or seen around just transition and the work that you do, and any opportunities related to that as well.
So the history of Better Cotton is that retailers and brands came together because there was an identified need for sustainable cotton. So over the last 15 years, we have been growing from strength to strength with more and more brands asking for sustainable cotton. And there has been, as I said, the whole value chain supports it. But over the years, especially before COVID, I would say there was a year-on-year growth in this. After COVID, there has been a more of a fragmented growth. It's not so. Market has changed, there is more compliance requirement, there is more need for example, physical traceable cotton, there is need for certification. So those kind of things also add to cost, but there is now definitely a need for more diverse investment to come in. Because if you look at it, like, let's take India, we are supporting 1 million cotton farmers, and the studies say that there are almost 6 million cotton farmers themselves, and most of them are smallholder farmers. And sustainability is a very broad subject, and even if there is need and intent and what you want to do, it requires money. And all that money cannot come from grants. It requires a more diversified set of money coming in. The CSR and philanthropic funds, which are the main source of funding in India, are normally directed towards what is, I would call, high and faster impact areas like health and education. So we need a more awareness why sustainability is important, because it is just not about environmental factors. It is a multi-pronged thing. And if we don't do it, it is going to impact, I'm sorry to sound very philosophical, but impact the planet. And we need to create awareness. We need to have more impact funders. We need to have entrepreneurs coming in, because you need just not the money, you need technological support, you need people who are thematic area experts. And so it is very diverse.
Super. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that around kind of the changes in terms of the landscape and kind of your views on what's needed there in terms of bringing more diverse, I guess, investment into the space. Lavanya, I'd love to come back to you just, I guess, with your role again in Good Business Lab in terms of interacting with different people in the ecosystem, and picking up this question on financing. Obviously, we've heard from Shahi and kind of the manufacturing point of view, and we have some balances to play there around cost economies and margins. Be really interested to hear from your work and the piece we talked to on worker well-being, what's needed to support this in terms of, is it like outcome-based funding? We heard a little bit about that earlier, but other financing mechanisms that can really help us achieve, I guess, this balance, and maybe you can even touch a little bit on the MSMEs piece as well, just to give that a bit of coverage.
Yeah, definitely. So, of course, we see and we have the evidence that investing in workers is not a cost, it's a profit. Having said that, different firms react to this differently. It's a different conversation with a Shahi that's a large manufacturer, has their own sustainability team and has the capital to drive this forward, as opposed to an MSME owner who's already doing 5 jobs. And if I add on sustainability on top of that, they probably don't have the bandwidth for it. And this is something we've seen in our work with dyeing clusters in Tirupur and West Bengal. So over the last 2 years, we've been working with 50 MSMEs in these 2 clusters. And thanks to philanthropic capital, we were able to provide them free energy audit reports and investment roadmaps. And our question was, does providing this information on the environmental benefit and the worker benefit change the uptake? And unfortunately, out of the 7 MSMEs, and I'm talking about the medium enterprises, I'm not even talking about the small and micro ones, only 2 out of 7 actually took up those recommendations and implemented those with all this hand-holding, which highlights 2 gaps, in my opinion. One, trust takes really long to build, and second, they just don't have the bandwidth or capital. So my view on financing that we need, and this is an open question for folks in the room, is one, how can we design differently for large manufacturers versus MSMEs? And can worker well-being metrics, now that we know through research it's not a cost, it's a benefit in the long run, it will generate financial return, can these worker well-being metrics be made a part of financing instruments, either as a requirement or a reward? And we have the data, we have the research, so we can provide you that data to make it part of financing instruments. And I think that's what's really required, because our research and philanthropic capital can only take this so far. After that, we do need private capital to come in and incentivize this.
Super, it's great. Yeah, so interesting to hear, I guess, what you're saying around tailored solutions required, and then a metrics piece, which kind of, I guess, links back to the case study by Apaya as well, in terms of evidence of how you could start to build that in to mechanism and structure. Lakshmi, I'd like to come back to you and kind of, I guess, building on what we've been talking about here. We know that we've talked to catalytic capital playing, I guess, a vital role in building the ecosystem. particularly when innovations are new or perceived being a key word there, as high risk. And often we see a little bit of kind of chicken and egg in terms of investors waiting for brands waiting for investors, etc. So how can we maybe ensure that more capital providers start to focus on just transition in fashion, and how can we really build out this ecosystem, maybe just speaking from your experience and some examples that you've seen in this space?
Yeah, I think what you talk about, that chicken and egg, we see this very, very often. And I come from a background of impact investing, so fortunate enough to understand a little bit of that and bring that into the philanthropy world, because I think the notion often as well is that philanthropy doesn't necessarily have skin in the game, and therefore perhaps is just in there for a bit and then sort of leaves. But allowed us, I think for us, it's really important to build out that ecosystem. So what is the transition on hand, and then how do you actually make that just? So some of the examples there is just, what you heard from Upaya, for example. It was not difficult for us to, for example, provide grant capital directly to the organizations, but we felt at the end of the day, if you want to create this as a sustainable business going forward with maybe opportunities for shared infrastructure that multiple textile waste companies can use to test out also the market case, the business case, going through someone like an Upaya who has a closer relationship and equity in these companies is perhaps a more sustainable way to do it. So having the investor in the discussion already up front and understanding then what do dignified jobs mean, what does a just element mean when you're actually looking at this transition, enables then more investors to come in. The same thing with what we talked about in the landscape space in cotton. We're looking to support now, over 10 years of work, having worked with bringing 300,000 farmers together across 4 countries. What can a finance facility be? Because there's so many investors, I'm sure in this room as well, who look at agri and agri-tech and livelihoods as opportunity areas. I think what's exciting about fashion is that it's not an industry on its own. It's actually very dependent and very interconnected with agriculture, with forests, with fossil fuels. So you need if you're talking about an energy mix change, it applies to fashion. You're talking about an agri change, it applies to fashion. So how do you actually connect the dots and provide the continuum of opportunities for investors? And that's really what we're working with a lot of our partners on the ground. So it's not just about fashion for good coming in with the innovations, but if they were to bring in chemical recycling innovations into a country like India, what does that mean for policy? What does that mean in terms of market? Where are the suppliers? So therefore, where do the recyclers need to, where does it make sense to place these recyclers? These conversations need to be had sort of in a holistic manner, and then you really start to connect the dots on the people as well. I think Gauri talked about the switch to biomass. This is a new supply chain if you actually look at it. So the fashion industry actually presents a lot of opportunities in that these are nascent supply chains. We are able to build it, and we have the luxury of learning from some of the mistakes from the past in, say, the cotton supply chain. How do we not repeat that and bring waste workers already in the circular transition? Or how do we bring suppliers and workers already into when we're changing up heat and lighting and make sure that productivity is also solved for, because at the end of the day, that creates the business case. So in terms of, what we've learned on Just Transition, it's really bringing a lot of these pieces together and not looking at it from a siloed approach. And I think in a lot of these cases, we're now ready as allowed us to also hand over to the investors. I feel the groundwork and the foundation of bringing the people along and those sort of pieces of the puzzle have been put together. The market is there. The supply chain is ready now because the commitments are there, the 2030 commitments on phasing out of coal, etc. So there is a market. And fashion also presents the unique opportunity in that it's not its own supply chain, but it is, you have so many other opportunities that it connects to. So really an invitation to investors to sort of look at this as a broader, bigger picture than a very myopic industry on its own.
Super. I think it's really valuable, that positioning, and I think that's more of the conversation we probably need to be having in these rooms around connecting the dots and talking to investable opportunities. I might just check and open up to the floor if there's any questions that we have from the audience. Burton is up and ready. No questions? Oh, we've one here at the front.
Thanks, and great panel, everyone. I'm curious as to, I mean, we've talked about textiles and there being multiple sort of first-order consequences, and in the previous panel, I was also mentioning water, and then you guys have also mentioned decarbonization. And so I'm curious, and maybe Lakshmi and Gauri in particular, like how do you stack them when you think about priorities? Because replacing coal in boilers, for instance, and decarbonization is critical, but I mean, even more importantly or directly, it can be like alternative materials or like organic cotton and things like that. So I think just, yeah, it'd be good to understand how one thinks about various scope 1, 2, 3, and do you stack them, or is it all about everything all at once?
That's a good question, because the innovation team at Shahi was set up 3 or 4 years ago. And when we were planning out, okay, where do we look for startups, where do we innovate, it was like some 10 categories, because everything is urgent and everything is pressing, everything has targets. This year, what we sort of realized, which is what I was talking about earlier, and this is purely a supplier perspective, or you can say purely a Shahi perspective, that the innovation, we've started seeing it in 2 ways, product and production. Product innovation, as I was saying earlier, the new materials, the new dye stuffs. We did a lot of trials, but nothing is properly scaling because the ball is in the brand's court in terms of placing those orders and pushing that. So we're taking a little bit of, I would say, slightly passive approach this year, where all the portfolio of pilots we've done are there for the brands to see, and if they would like to offtake any of those, we're willing. Where we're actually realizing as a supply chain, we can do more is the production innovation. So water recycling, processing technologies, which are not necessarily like new dye stuffs or chemicals, but they are ways for us to reduce our footprint, what is within our control. Like we don't need a brand to come in and say, can you do this for us? This is, if it has a clear ROI, or even if it's cost neutral and has a good environmental impact, we would go for it. So I would say the focus has now become on decarbonization. Some of it is driven by brands, yes, but some of it is also driven by, for example, making sure that our operations are running on renewable electricity by a certain time, which is 2027. And then, yeah, more focus on processing, internal operations, how can we optimize within what's in our sort of control. So I'm just giving you the very narrow sort of Shahi perspective right now.
And maybe I can just quickly add here, at least, you know, from our standpoint as more neutral, because we're not a supply chain actor as such. It's 2 things. One is the market ready for it? And that's where bulk of our last years of support went into, because materials processing and production together are big emission hotspots. So we did a lot of the enabling trials, getting Fashion for Good and others to say, okay, can you bring multiple suppliers, multiple innovators, multiple companies to test things out? So we're now, I think, at a place where there's enough innovations to at least signal that there's promise to now start deploying. And therefore, using that as an entry point, we feel it's the right time to move into tier 2 and tier 3 supply chain, which is where the scope 3 emissions happen. The brand commitments are there. If we were to go into tier 2, tier 3 supply, say a few years ago, I mean, there was no demand yet because there was nothing to deploy as yet at scale. So we see that as the sort of logical approach now. And the opportunity then of working on tier 2 and tier 3 is exactly what you said. The fact that water, energy, materials, these are all looked at so separately, but they're all so integrated. So we have now the opportunity of bringing along suppliers to say, how do you solve for this together? Can you look at sort of harmonized audits from brands and things like that that will actually make the case for these switches to be a little bit more sustainable as well. And so, yeah, I mean, long story short, I think there's priorities dependent on when the market is ready for it, so that then you have the business case and the investment case to follow through.
Great, thanks.
Super. Super. I'm conscious of time, so Varun is nodding at me. But I just want to, I'm going to wrap it up there. I just want to take a minute to give a huge thanks to our panelists. I find that really interesting just in terms of, I guess, connecting the dots and some of the practical considerations, but also what does that mean in terms of creating investable opportunities. We've heard lots of key pieces on, taking in a holistic viewpoint, worker well-being as a priority, and also a benefit, a profit, one might add, as opposed to looking at it as a cost. And how do we kind of integrate some of those key considerations and build on the building blocks that are there in the foundation that Laudes and others have helped create in terms of strengthening that ecosystem. So I think what's left to say is that we need, patient, flexible capital now, and I guess aligned action across the ecosystem in order to unlock action and really increase the pace of change across the industry. Really happy, as I said, to be working on this project with IIC. We're hoping through the next round of stakeholder engagement that we'll start to deepen into some of these conversations and draw out what those actions look like from an investor standpoint. So really looking forward to, I guess, keeping you guys up to speed with that as it comes out. So thank you once again to my esteemed panelists, and I will hand back over to the team at IIC.
Ashlyn, sometimes I feel we think a lot alike because I had written exactly the similar points to summarize as well. So I won't do the job of summarizing some of it, but thank you all for being there and joining us. Really, really insightful. I think a couple of points that I want to mention is, one thing that stood out for me is investing in people or process actually improves the margin rather than otherwise, because that's the conventional approach to how we look at it. So that's really interesting to see that it is otherwise. We hope more people are aware about it, and we hope we have more such case studies being presented as well. And very valuable points. Thank you very much for joining in. Now we break for lunch, and post that we have a closed door roundtable discussion as well, where we hope to get more perspectives from all of you. I'm sure you are reserving some of those questions that you want to ask to the panel members as well, so we can bring that up during the closed door session. We now break for lunch as well, and then we reconvene at 2:30. Yeah? Thank you.